Whispers between stars. The first thing Roan Vega noticed about Helios 9 was the smell, stale recycled air laced with the metallic tang of overworked machinery. The second thing was the silence. For a station supposedly housing 32 crew members, the docking bay echoed with an emptiness that made his skin prickle. "Welcome to the edge of nowhere," announced a bored voice over the intercom. "Luggage to the left, complaints to the void." Roan hoisted his duffel bag higher on his shoulder and squinted at the flickering lights overhead. After 6 years of stellar maintenance work with a spotless record, he'd finally managed to get himself exiled to the furthest outpost in the Cassini sector. One small disagreement with his former captain about safety protocols, which may have escalated to reprogramming the officers' quarters to play ancient Earth disco music at random intervals, and here he was. The corridor leading from the docking bay stretched before him, its walls patched with mismatched panels and exposed wiring that made him wince. As he walked, the station groaned around him like an old man settling into an uncomfortable chair. "You must be the new tech," said a lanky man with a patchy beard who appeared from a side corridor. "I'm Devin. Communications Officer and Unofficial Welcoming Committee. Roan Vega. Maintenance. Word of your arrival got here before you did," Devin said with a knowing look. Something about making a captain's quarters play, "Stayin' Alive," whenever he entered the bathroom. It was "Dancing Queen," actually. Roan shrugged. "I stand by my artistic choices." Devin led him through a maze of corridors, pointing out essential locations, mess hall, med bay, recreational pod, all of which looked equally worn and neglected. As they passed the observation deck, Roan caught a glimpse of something that made him stop short. In the dim blue light of the observation window stood a figure so still she might have been carved from shadow. Tall and slender, she wore a long, dark garment that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Her skin was a pale violet that shifted subtly under the starlight, but what drew his attention were the intricate patterns that seemed to flow across her exposed arms and neck, living tattoos that pulsed with gentle bioluminescence. "Who's that?" Roan asked, unable to look away. Devin's expression tightened. "That's Nyx. Our resident alien. Best keep your distance." "Why?" "Station Commander Harlow brought her aboard 3 months ago. Scientific research, they said." Devin lowered his voice. "Between you and me, I think the commander's using her to get leverage with Galactic Science Division. Promotion fodder." "What species is she?" "Lamari. From the Vale Nebula region. Supposedly they're empaths or something. Can read emotions through light frequencies." Devin shrugged. "All I know is weird things happen around her. Systems malfunction. People report nightmares. Just stay away, all right?" Roan nodded absently, still watching the alien woman. Just before Devin pulled him away, she turned, as if sensing his gaze. Her eyes caught his, large, pupilless orbs that shimmered like liquid silver. She didn't blink. Didn't move. Just watched him with an intensity that made his breath catch. "Seriously," Devin muttered, "don't get involved." Later that night, unable to sleep in his assigned quarters, a glorified storage closet with a cot and sink, Roan found himself wandering back to the observation deck. He told himself he was just checking the station's layout, but even he didn't believe the lie. The deck was empty when he arrived, nothing but stars beyond the reinforced glass and the soft hum of life support systems. Disappointed, he moved to the window and pressed his palm against the cool surface, feeling the subtle vibration of the station's old engines. "You're new." The voice came from behind him, melodic and low, with an accent that made ordinary words sound like poetry. Roan turned to find Nyx standing at the entrance, partially hidden in shadow. "I'm Roan," he said, restraining the urge to step closer. "Maintenance technician. They've warned you about me." It wasn't a question. They tried. She moved forward, each step fluid and precise. The patterns on her skin pulsed slightly brighter as she approached, casting a faint blue glow around her. "And yet you're here." Roan shrugged. I've never been good at following warnings. A small sound escaped her, not quite a laugh, more like a breath of surprise. Humans often say one thing and mean another. Your emotions betray you. Can you really read emotions? Nyx tilted her head slightly. Not the way you think. I see resonance. Light reflects differently from beings who feel. It creates patterns. That's fascinating. And terrifying, Roan thought. What do you see when you look at me? She asked suddenly. Roan considered her, the graceful curves of her face, the strange, hypnotic swirls on her skin, the eyes that seemed both ancient and painfully young. Someone who's very far from home, he said finally. Something flickered across her face, surprise, perhaps, or recognition. She moved closer to the window, her reflection overlaying the stars. This station is dying, she said quietly. Like me. Before Roan could ask what she meant, she was gone, slipping away with that same unnatural grace, leaving him alone with the stars and a strange, hollow feeling in his chest. Over the next week, Roan learned 3 things about Helios 9. First, the station was indeed falling apart, held together by improvisation and what his predecessor had called creative mechanical interpretation. Second, most of the crew avoided the eastern corridor where Nyx had been quartered. And third, Commander Harlow was definitely using the alien woman for something beyond simple, scientific research. Roan discovered the last bit while repairing ventilation ducts near the commander's office. Through the grating, he overheard a heated conversation with someone from Galactic Command. The Lumari biolight sequences could revolutionize our navigation systems, Harlow was saying. She's the key to it all. If I can just figure out how to replicate the patterns. The Lumari Conclave has formally requested her return, came the reply. They're claiming abduction. She came willingly. She's a refugee, for God's sake. They were going to execute her. For what? A pause. Genetic deviation. Apparently, her light patterns are considered aberrant. A corruption. Roan pulled away from the duct, his mind racing. He found himself heading toward the eastern corridor before he'd even made a conscious decision. He found Nyx in what had once been a secondary lab, now converted into sparse living quarters. She sat cross-legged on the floor, her hands tracing patterns in the air that left faint trails of luminescence. You've been avoiding me, she said without looking up. I've been busy. This station has more issues than a therapy group. The corner of her mouth twitched, almost a smile. You're curious about me. About why I'm here. I heard the commander talking. About the Lumari wanting you back. About execution. Her hands stilled, the light fading. My patterns are wrong. Imperfect. Among my people, imperfection is intolerable. Because of how you look. That's not how I look, she interrupted. How I feel. My emotions create distorted light. My grief, it doesn't fade as it should. It lingers, corrupts the patterns. She finally looked up at him. I cannot stop mourning, and that makes me dangerous to them. Roan moved closer, sitting across from her. What happened? My bondmate died. An accident during a solar harvesting mission. Among the Lumari, grief is expected to transform into acceptance after the mourning period, one cycle of our binary suns. Mine didn't. She raised her hand, and the patterns on her skin shifted, darkening to a deep indigo shot through with pulsing red. This is grief, she said softly. Raw, unprocessed, unending. It creates disharmony in the collective light. So they sentenced me to excision, the removal of my ability to generate light. It would have left me hollow, empty. So you ran. Commander Harlow's research team found me. Offered sanctuary in exchange for studying my bioluminescence. Her smile was bitter. I traded one prison for another. He's using you, Roan said. Trying to adapt your light patterns for navigation systems. I know. But better to be used than erased. She looked at him intently. Why are you here, Roan Vega? Why seek me out when others stay away? It was a fair question. One he'd been asking himself. I know what it's like to be the problem no one wants to deal with, he said finally. To be treated like you're broken when you're just different. For a long moment, Nyx studied him, her silver eyes unblinking. Then slowly, deliberately, she extended her hand. Roan hesitated only briefly before taking it. Where their skin touched, her patterns changed, shifting from indigo to a softer violet threaded with gold. The light spread up her arm, across her shoulder, to her face. What does that mean? He whispered. Connection, she said, her voice barely audible. Hope. They sat like that, hand in hand, until the station lights dimmed for night cycle. And for the first time since arriving on Helios 9, Roan felt like he might have found something worth staying for. Little did he know that across the stars, a Lumari enforcement vessel had already charted its course, straight for their fragile sanctuary. The light of foreign suns. 3 weeks into his assignment on Helios 9, Roan had established 2 routines. The first involved desperately keeping the station's failing systems operational through a combination of engineering ingenuity and colorful profanity. The second, far more pleasant, involved spending every free moment with Nyx. They met during the quietest shift hours in the observation deck or the unused botanical garden where the hydroponic system still struggled to produce stunted versions of Earth plants. Roan would bring rare treats scavenged from supply shipments, synthetic fruit, chocolate protein bars, or once, memorably, a smuggled bottle of Martian whiskey that had made her luminescent patterns swirl in chaotic, beautiful spirals. It tastes like fire and regret, she had said, wrinkling her nose after a careful sip. That's the authentic human experience, Roan had replied with a grin. Today, he found her in the botanical garden, kneeling beside a tray of struggling seedlings. As he approached, he noticed her hands hovering over the plants, her skin emitting a gentle golden light that the pale stems seemed to reach toward. Are you feeding them? He asked, settling beside her. Sharing energy, she corrected. They're starving. Your station's light spectrum lacks the frequencies they need. Roan watched, fascinated, as the plants visibly strengthened under her attention. I didn't know you could do that. My people were cultivators before we became navigators. Her patterns dimmed slightly. Another tradition I failed to honor properly. He'd learned to read her moods through the shifting colors on her skin, bright azure for curiosity, deep purple for contemplation, the dangerous crimson indigo that signaled her grief. Today there was a new undercurrent of silvery white that he couldn't interpret. Something's wrong, he said. Nyx's hands stilled. You're becoming too attuned to me. Is that a bad thing? She looked at him then, her silver eyes reflecting his own image back at him. They're coming for me, Roan. His stomach dropped. The Lumari? How do you know? I feel them. Their light signatures are distinctive. A search party. She returned her attention to the plants. Commander Harlow received a transmission this morning. They've demanded my return. And what did he say? He's negotiating. Trying to secure research rights in exchange for my surrender. Her voice was flat, emotionless, but her skin betrayed her, flickering with rapid pulses of fear. Roan swore under his breath. We need to get you off this station. There's nowhere to go. The Lumari are masters of light, they can track my signature across half the galaxy. She finally looked up at him. But you could leave. Request a transfer before they arrive. Distance yourself. Not happening. They will punish anyone who interferes. Then they'll have to punish me. He reached for her hand, watched as gold and violet spirals spread from where their fingers touched. I'm not exactly known for making smart choices. The silvery white pattern intensified across her skin. This isn't one of your rebellions against authority, Roan. The Lumari Conclave doesn't issue reprimands or demotions. They remake you. There has to be a way out of this. Some loophole, some legal protection. There isn't. Her fingers tightened around his. But there is something you can do for me. Name it. Help me see the stars. Really see them, not through reinforced glass. Before they take me. Roan frowned. You want to go EVA? Outside the station? Yes. It was dangerous, unauthorized, and exactly the kind of reckless plan that had gotten him sent to Helios 9 in the first place. Naturally, he agreed immediately. That night, while most of the station slept, Roan led Nix to the secondary airlock near the maintenance bay. He disabled the security alerts and prepared 2 EVA suits, standard issue for the technicians who occasionally needed to perform external repairs. These suits aren't designed for Lumari, he explained as he helped her into one. The filtration system might feel uncomfortable with your biology. It doesn't matter, she said, watching as he secured the seals around her wrists. Our bodies can adapt to different atmospheric conditions for short periods. Still, we'll keep it brief. 15 minutes max. She nodded, but he could tell her attention was already elsewhere, focused on the stars visible through the small airlock window. Once they were suited up, Roan checked the tethers one final time before activating the airlock sequence. The chamber depressurized with a soft hiss that sent his heart racing with both anxiety and exhilaration. Ready? He asked over the suit's communication system. Yes, she replied, her voice catching slightly. The outer door slid open, revealing the vast, silent expanse of space. Together, they stepped out onto the station's exterior hull, magnetic boots keeping them secured to the surface. Roan had been outside stations before, but the view never ceased to humble him, endless darkness punctuated by the cold fire of distant suns, all of it spinning slowly as Helios 9 rotated on its axis. But watching Nix experience it was something else entirely. She stood perfectly still, her silver eyes wide behind her helmet's visor, reflecting the cosmos. Inside her suit, her luminescent patterns had exploded into dazzling complexity, colors he'd never seen from her before, weaving together in harmonies that seemed to echo the stars themselves. It's beautiful, he said, unable to tell if he meant the universe or her response to it. They're singing, she whispered. All of them, across the spectrum. Light has voice, Roan. If you could hear what I hear. She extended her arms, as if embracing the void. Through her suit, her patterns blazed so brightly that they illuminated the hull around them, casting strange shadows that shifted and danced. I understand now, she said after a long moment. Understand what? Why I couldn't let go of my grief. Why my patterns remained corrupted. She turned to face him, her expression visible through the visor, serene, resolved. I was never meant to be part of the collective light. I was meant to find my own. Before Roan could ask what she meant, an alarm blared in his helmet, proximity warning. He spun around to see a ship emerging from the darkness, sleek and predatory, its hull inscribed with patterns similar to those on Nix's skin. They're here, she said simply. Roan grabbed her arm. Back inside. Now. They hurried back through the airlock, discarding their helmets as soon as the chamber repressurized. Roan's mind raced, calculating options, escape routes, anything that might buy them time. The shuttle bay, he said. We could. No. Nix placed her hand on his chest, her touch leaving a faint glow through his undersuit. I won't run anymore. You can't be serious. You know what they'll do to you. Her patterns had stabilized into a calm, steady blue. What I showed you out there, that's what I need to bring back to my people. They've forgotten how to see the true light. They've wrapped themselves in rules and symmetry until they can't recognize beauty in chaos. And you think they'll listen? People who were ready to erase your emotions because they were inconvenient. Not at first. But light persists, Roan. It travels. It changes things, slowly but inevitably. She smiled, her patterns briefly flaring with that same silvery white he'd noticed earlier. What you humans call hope. The station's intercom crackled to life, Commander Harlow's voice tight with suppressed panic. Attention all personnel. We have received visitors from the Lumari Conclave. Remain at your posts. This is a diplomatic matter. Roan cursed. This isn't diplomacy. It's an extraction. Yes. Nix took his hand. Come. If this is to be my last act of defiance, I want witnesses. She led him through the corridors toward the main docking bay, her steps unhurried, her back straight. Other crew members peered out from doorways as they passed, drawn by the unusual brightness of her patterns, which now pulsed with a steady, determined rhythm. When they reached the bay, they found Commander Harlow already there, flanked by security personnel, facing 3 tall Lumari visitors. Unlike Nix, these Lumari had patterns that moved in perfect, predictable sequences, geometric and orderly, predominantly cool blues and greens without variation. Their silver eyes were identical, their expressions blank. Aberrant Nix, said the tallest of the 3, you have violated excision orders and fled lawful sentencing. You will return for processing. Nix stepped forward, still holding Roan's hand. I acknowledge your authority, Elder Thal, but I reject your sentence. The Lumari delegation's patterns flickered in perfect unison. Disapproval, Roan guessed. Your corruption spreads, Elder Thal said, gaze moving to where their hands joined. You contaminate this human with disordered light. I show him truth, Nix countered. As I will show all Lumari, if you give me voice before the conclave. Impossible. Your patterns are chaotic, painful to witness. Because they're real. For the first time, Roan heard real anger in her voice. Because grief and love and hope don't follow your prescribed harmonies. The stars don't dance to your rhythms, Elder. Why should we? The Lumari's patterns intensified, and Roan felt a strange pressure in his head, light translated to force somehow, pushing against him. Enough, Harlow interjected. This is still my station. I demand. Silence, said another of the Lumari visitors, and the commander's mouth closed abruptly, his eyes widening in shock. Roan stepped forward, placing himself slightly in front of Nix. You can't just take her. She has rights under Galactic Confederation law. Human law does not apply to Lumari affairs, Elder Thal said dismissively. Stand aside. No. Roan planted his feet. If you want her, you go through me first. The 3rd Lumari visitor tilted their head. Your bond with this aberrant is strong. Unexpected. Her name is Nix, Roan said through gritted teeth, and she's not an aberrant. She's evolved. Adapted. She can show your people things you've never seen. Dangerous things, Elder Thal countered. Necessary things, Nix said quietly. She stepped around Roan, her patterns now so bright they cast shadows across the docking bay. When was the last time any of you truly looked at the stars, elders? Not as navigation points or energy sources, but as what they are, chaotic, beautiful expressions of light. She raised her hands, and suddenly the patterns on her skin shifted, rearranging themselves into a perfect recreation of the star field they had just witnessed outside the station. But this version pulsed with life, with meaning, telling a story in light that even Roan, with his limited human perception, could sense was profound. The Lumari visitors went completely still, their own patterns dimming as if in shock. This is what I learned in exile, Nix continued. That light is not meant to be controlled or standardized. It's meant to be witnessed, in all its wild variations. She turned to Roan. And sometimes, it needs darkness to truly shine. Elder Thal's patterns had begun to change, subtly at first, then with increasing complexity. This is not according to the ancient harmonies. No, Nix agreed. It's something new. Something better. For a long moment, no one spoke. The humans in the room, Roan, Harlow, the security personnel, watched in confused silence as some invisible communication seemed to pass between the Lumari, their patterns shifting and responding to each other. Finally, Elder Thal spoke again. The conclave must witness this aberration. This evolution. Then I will return with you, Nick said, but not as a prisoner. As a teacher. And not alone, Roan added firmly. Nix turned to him, surprise rippling across her patterns. Roan. I'm coming with you, he said. Someone needs to make sure they actually listen. Besides, he added with a small smile, I was getting bored with fixing this rust bucket anyway. Her patterns flared with that silvery white again, and now Roan finally understood what it meant, affection, connection, perhaps something deeper that had no human equivalent. The human cannot survive in Lumari environments, Elder Thal objected. Then we'll find a compromise, Nix countered. As we must learn to do in all things. 3 days later, Roan stood in the same docking bay, a single bag containing his few possessions slung over his shoulder. Around him, the crew of Helios 9 had gathered, not out of fondness for him, he suspected, but out of curiosity about his unprecedented decision. You understand this is permanent? Commander Harlow asked, frowning. Even if the Lumari allow you to leave eventually, your position here won't be held. I'm aware, sir. Roan glanced toward the Lumari vessel where Nix waited. Some journeys don't have return tickets. Devon stepped forward, looking both concerned and impressed. Never thought you'd top the dancing bathroom stunt, but here we are. Good luck out there, Vega. Thanks. Roan shook his hand. Keep the station running until they send a proper replacement, yeah. No promises. With final nods to the gathered crew, Roan turned and walked up the ramp into the Lumari ship. Inside, the environment was unlike anything he'd experienced, the architecture flowing and organic, the light itself seeming alive, responsive to movement and emotion. Nix was waiting for him, her patterns calm but bright with anticipation. Final chance to change your mind. Not a chance. He set down his bag. Besides, someone needs to document this whole cultural revolution you're about to start. I'm thinking The Girl Who Taught Stars to Dance as a working title. She laughed, a sound he'd only recently coaxed from her, and her patterns rippled with delight. The Lumari may not understand your humor. Then I'll teach them that, too. He reached for her hand, watched the now familiar dance of gold and violet spread between them. One light at a time. The ship's engines hummed to life, a melodic sound unlike the mechanical growl of human vessels. As they pulled away from Helios 9, Roan felt a moment of uncertainty. He was leaving behind everything familiar, venturing into a culture so alien it communicated in spectrums he couldn't even perceive. But then Nix squeezed his hand, her silver eyes reflecting starlight, and he knew he was exactly where he needed to be, following a light that had found him across impossible distances, teaching him to see beauty in the spaces between stars. The harmony of shadows. The Lumari homeworld of Prisma was nothing like Roan had imagined. From orbit, it appeared as a gleaming sphere wrapped in gossamer veils of light, auroras that danced across its atmosphere in complex, mathematical patterns. But standing on its surface, he felt like he'd stepped inside a living jewel. Crystalline structures rose from the planet's silvery landscape, each one pulsing with its own inner rhythm of light. The sky above wasn't the blue of Earth or the rusty haze of Mars, but a shimmering canvas of soft pastels that shifted with the position of the 3 distant suns. Even the air felt different, charged with a subtle energy that made the fine hairs on his arms stand up. It's like being inside a symphony, Roan whispered, turning slowly to take it all in. Beside him, Nix watched his reaction with quiet amusement. In the 6 weeks since they'd left Helios 9, she'd been teaching him to see light as her people did, not just as illumination but as language, emotion, living history. He couldn't perceive even a fraction of what she could, but he was learning. This is Luminera, she explained, the ancestral gathering place. Where the first Lumari learned to manipulate light frequencies. They stood on a wide platform overlooking a vast amphitheater carved from what appeared to be a single massive crystal. Below, hundreds of Lamari moved in coordinated patterns, their skin glowing with synchronized colors that flowed from one individual to the next like a current. The convergence ritual, Nick said, her voice tight. I haven't seen it since, before. Roan knew she meant before her bondmate's death, before her grief had made her an outcast. He took her hand, a gesture that still drew disapproving glances from passing Lamari. Are you ready for this? He asked. Today was the day she would present her case to the Lamari conclave, her argument for a new understanding of their relationship with light. Elder Thal had arranged the hearing, but had made no promises about the outcome. No, Nyx admitted, her patterns flickering with nervous energy. But necessary things rarely wait for readiness. A soft chime resonated through the air, not sound exactly, but a vibration that Roan felt in his chest more than heard with his ears. It's time, Nyx said. They descended into the amphitheater, following a path that spiraled down from the observation platform. Roan had been provided with special lenses that filtered the most intense light frequencies. Without them, the combined brilliance of so many Lamari would have blinded him within minutes. Even with protection, the experience was overwhelming. The Lamari didn't just communicate with words, but with waves of light that carried emotional context, historical references, philosophical nuances, all simultaneously. It was like trying to read 1,000 books at once, each one written in a language he barely understood. At the center of the amphitheater stood a raised dais where 7 elders waited, their patterns flowing in perfect harmony, a visual representation of complete consensus. Elder Thal was among them, his expression unreadable as Nyx approached. Roan had been instructed to remain at the edge of the gathering. This was Lamari business, and despite his journey with Nyx, he was still an outsider. He watched from a distance as she ascended to the dais alone, her head held high despite the ripples of disapproval that visibly moved through the crowd. What followed was unlike any hearing or trial Roan had witnessed. Nyx didn't speak, at least not with words. Instead, her entire body became a canvas of light. She started slowly, her patterns forming the traditional sequences he'd seen other Lamari use, showing her respect for their ways. Then, gradually, her light began to change. The ordered patterns gave way to something wilder, more organic. Colors bloomed across her skin that Roan had never seen before, pulsing with an intensity that made some of the elders physically recoil. The crowd's reaction was immediate, a wave of discordant light patterns that even Roan could interpret as shock and disapproval. But Nyx didn't stop. If anything, her display grew more intense, more passionate. She was showing them grief in its raw form, not sanitized, not ordered into acceptable patterns, but as the chaotic, beautiful mess it truly was. And then, seamlessly, she transitioned to show how that grief had transformed her, opened her to new perceptions, new possibilities. Roan couldn't understand the specific arguments being made, but he could feel the emotional current of it. This wasn't just about one aberrant Lamari fighting for acceptance. This was about the future of an entire species that had become so obsessed with harmony they'd forgotten the value of discord. The display continued for what felt like hours, the light in the amphitheater shifting and swirling as arguments were made, countered, considered. Occasionally, one of the elders would join the light conversation, their patterns interacting with Nyx's in ways that created new, emergent forms. Finally, Elder Thal raised his hand, and a hush fell over the gathering. He approached Nyx, his own patterns subdued, contemplative. They exchanged a brief wave of light, too subtle and complex for Roan to interpret, before Thal turned to address the assembly. The aberrant Nyx has shown us patterns unknown to our historical records, he announced, his voice amplified throughout the space. Whether these represent corruption or evolution remains undetermined. The conclave will retreat to consider this matter. Until a decision is reached, the aberrant will remain in isolation. Roan started forward, protest rising in his throat, but a firm hand on his shoulder held him back. He turned to find a young Lamari beside him, one he recognized from the ship that had brought them to Prisma. Wait, the young Lamari advised. Interference now will only harm her case. Roan watched helplessly as Nyx was escorted from the dais by two elders, her patterns now subdued but still defiant. Just before she disappeared from view, she turned and met his eyes across the distance, her silver gaze steady and reassuring. "Trust me," her patterns seemed to say. And despite everything, he did. 3 days passed with no word from or about Nyx. Roan had been given quarters in a district reserved for the rare non-Lumari visitors, mostly diplomatic representatives and scientific researchers. The rooms were comfortable but alien, designed for beings who communicated and perceived differently than he did. He spent his time wandering the accessible areas of the city, trying to understand the culture that had shaped Nyx. Everywhere he looked, he saw order, beautiful, perfect, sterile order. Light was controlled, directed, refined to mathematical precision. There was beauty here, but it was the beauty of a perfectly solved equation, not the wild glory of a sunrise or a storm. On the 4th day, the young Lumari who had restrained him at the assembly, who had introduced himself as Lydex, appeared at his quarters. "The conclave has reached a decision," Lydex said without preamble. "Nyx will present her final statement at today's gathering. You are permitted to attend." "What's the verdict?" Roan asked, already reaching for his coat. "Unknown. The elders have been unusually private in their deliberations." Lydex's patterns shifted in a way that suggested confusion. "There are rumors of disagreement among them." "Disagreement? I thought that was what your people were trying to avoid." "It is unprecedented," Lydex admitted. "Which is why many of us will be watching closely." The amphitheater was even more crowded than before, with Lumari packed into every available space. An electric tension filled the air, or perhaps it was light itself, vibrating with collective anticipation. This time, Roan was escorted to a position closer to the center, where he could clearly see the dais. The 7 elders were already present, but something was different about them. Their patterns no longer flowed in perfect synchronization. Subtle variations were visible now, individual differences that would have been imperceptible to him weeks ago. Nyx was led to the dais by Lydex and another young Lumari. She walked with dignity, her head held high, her pattern steady and calm. When she reached the center, she turned slowly, surveying the gathered crowd until her gaze found Roan. The briefest flicker of silver white, their private signal, passed across her skin. Elder Thal stepped forward. "Aberrant Nyx, the conclave has considered your demonstration. We have reviewed the historical records, consulted the light memories of our ancestors, and contemplated the potential implications of your unique patterns." A hush fell over the crowd. The traditional sentence for aberrant light is excision, the removal of one's ability to generate independent patterns. Thal paused, and for the first time, Roan saw uncertainty in the elders' movements. However, the conclave is not unanimous in this judgment. A shock wave of light rippled through the assembly, surprise, confusion, even outrage from some quarters. 3 elders believe your patterns represent corruption that must be purged. 3 believe they represent evolution that must be studied. Thal's gaze fixed directly on Nyx. "I cast the deciding vote." Roan held his breath, his heart hammering against his ribs. "In all our history, the Lumari have valued harmony above all else," Thal continued. "We have sought to perfect our light, to eliminate discord, to achieve unity of purpose and expression. But perfection without growth is stagnation." The elders' patterns shifted into something new, a complex interplay of traditional forms and subtle innovations that seemed to bridge the gap between orthodox Lumari expression and Nyx's wild variations. "I have studied the stars as you suggested, Nyx. I have seen the chaos and beauty there. And I have looked into our oldest records, from before the Great Harmonization." Thal turned to address the assembly. "Our ancestors once embraced discord as part of growth. They understood that light cannot exist without shadow, that harmony means nothing without the memory of dissonance." Another ripple passed through the crowd, but this time mixed with curiosity, uncertainty. "Therefore, I rule that the aberrant Nyx shall not face excision." Instead, she will establish a new school of light study, to explore the patterns she has discovered and their potential meaning for our future. Nyx's patterns flared with surprise and cautious joy, but she maintained her composure. However, Thal added, his tone grave, this ruling comes with conditions. Your work must be contained, controlled, studied carefully for its effects. And, he glanced briefly at Roan, your human companion must depart. His presence disrupts the light harmony. Roan felt as if the floor had dropped away beneath him. After everything, the escape from Helios 9, the journey here, the weeks of learning and growing together, he was still being cast as the outsider, the corrupting influence. Nyx's patterns darkened momentarily before she spoke. With respect, Elder Thal, you misunderstand the nature of harmony. True balance doesn't come from exclusion, but from integration. She stepped forward, her patterns now shimmering with a quiet intensity that commanded attention. You speak of containing discord, studying it like a disease, when you should be embracing it as essential. Light without shadow creates blindness. Sound without silence is just noise. She extended her hand toward Roan. My bond with this human has taught me more about light than centuries of Lamari doctrine ever could, because he sees differently. His perception completes mine. This is not negotiable, another elder interjected, her patterns rigid with disapproval. The human leaves, or the judgment reverts to excision. A tense silence fell over the amphitheater. Roan wanted to speak, to fight this decision, but he knew this wasn't his battle to wage. This was Nyx's people, Nyx's future. Then, from the edge of the gathering, a soft light began to pulse. A young Lamari stepped forward, their patterns displaying the same wild variations that Nyx had demonstrated, grief, longing, hope all intertwined in beautiful discord. Another joined them, then another. Soon, a dozen Lamari stood with patterns that defied the traditional harmonies, each unique, each expressing emotions and thoughts that had long been suppressed in the name of order. You see, Nyx said quietly. I am not alone in my aberration. These are your children, your students, your future. Will you excise them all? Elder Thal stared at the growing group of dissenters, his patterns flickering with what Roan now recognized as profound uncertainty. The other elders conferred in rapid exchanges of light too complex for him to follow. Finally, Thal spoke again. This complicates matters. No, Nyx countered. This simplifies them. You asked whether my patterns represent corruption or evolution. Look around you and see the answer. She moved to join the group of like-patterned Lamari, standing among them as an equal, not a leader. Together, their combined light created something Roan had never seen before, a harmony made of deliberate discord, a unity that celebrated difference rather than erasing it. We do not reject Lamari ways, Nyx continued. We seek to expand them. To remember what was forgotten. To grow beyond what we have been. The elders conferred again, this time for longer. The crowd watched in tense silence, individual patterns betraying a range of reactions, fear, hope, confusion, curiosity. When Elder Thal finally spoke again, his voice was heavy with the weight of history. The conclave will reconsider its position. In the interim, no excisions will be performed. Those with aberrant patterns will be permitted to continue their explorations under observation. It wasn't a victory, not exactly. But it was an opening, a crack in the perfect, orderly facade of Lamari society. As the assembly began to disperse, Nyx made her way to Roan, her patterns swirling with complex emotions. It's a beginning, she said softly. What happens now? He asked. Change. Slowly, imperfectly, painfully. She took his hand, ignoring the disapproving glances from passing Lamari. And you? I'm not leaving, Roan said firmly. Not unless you want me to. Her patterns flared with that now familiar silver white. I thought humans were supposed to be obedient to authority. He grinned. Have you met any humans? We're terrible at following rules. So I've noticed. Her expression grew serious. It won't be easy. You'll always be an outsider here. I was an outsider everywhere else too. He squeezed her hand gently. At least here, I'm an outsider who's helping make history. Lydex approached them, his own patterns showing subtle variations that hadn't been there before. The elders wish to speak with both of you. They have questions about human perceptions of light. Nyx and Roan exchanged a glance. Tell them we'll come, Nyx said. But first, I want to show him the crystal falls at sunset. He needs to understand what we're fighting for. Lydex nodded, a faint smile crossing his features. I believe I begin to understand why your patterns changed, Nyx. Perhaps discord has its own wisdom. As he departed, Roan turned to Nyx. Crystal Falls. A place where light and water dance together, she explained. Where harmony and chaos meet in perfect balance. She tugged gently at his hand. Come. There's so much I still want you to see. Together they walked away from the amphitheater, two beings from different worlds, their shadows merging into one as the three sons of Prisma painted the crystalline city in colors no single species could fully perceive alone. 6 months later, the Lumari Conclave formally recognized the establishment of what became known as the Discordant Academy, a school dedicated to the study and development of new light patterns. Under Nyx's guidance, young Lumari learned to express emotions that had long been considered dangerous or disruptive, integrating them into new forms of communication that were richer, more nuanced than anything their species had known for generations. Roan found his place as a bridge between worlds, helping the Lumari understand how other species perceived light, introducing concepts from human art and music that challenged their rigid definitions of harmony. His presence remained controversial among the traditionalists, but the growing movement of discordance welcomed his perspective. In quiet moments, he sometimes found himself standing at the edge of the crystal falls with Nyx, watching as light fractured through millions of crystalline droplets, creating ephemeral rainbows that lived and died in seconds. Do you ever regret it? He asked her once. Leaving your old life behind? Starting all of this? She considered the question, her patterns rippling with thought. Regret implies I had a choice. Grief changed me. You helped me see that change is growth rather than corruption. And now you're changing your whole society. No. She smiled, her silver eyes reflecting the dancing lights. They're changing themselves. I'm just showing them possibilities. She took his hand, and their shadows stretched long across the crystal landscape, two different beings from different worlds, creating something new in the spaces between them. That's all anyone can do, really, she said softly. Show others what might be possible, then let them find their own light. Roan nodded, watching as a new group of young Lumari arrived at the falls, their patterns wild and beautiful in their controlled chaos. They nodded respectfully to Nyx, their teacher, their pioneer, before beginning their own exploration of the interplay between light and shadow. In the distance, the three sons of Prisma were setting, their combined light creating a symphony of color unlike anything on Earth. It wasn't home, would never be home, not really. But standing there with Nyx, watching as their work took root and flourished, Roan knew he had found where he belonged. Not in a place, but in a purpose. Not in perfect harmony, but in the beautiful discord of growth and change. And that, he thought as darkness slowly embraced the crystal world, was light enough to live by.